Morning all. Flipping lovely day. Got the whole canal to myself it seems, and the sun is shining. Welcome to my first edition of What's in My Bag, and today I thought it would be good to talk about something that is really very underrated, but we all use all of the time in forest school, in bushcraft, in outdoor activities, and that is ropes and knot work. So I'm going to find a spot in the sun and I'm going to go through a few little demos that hopefully will be useful and instructive. Beautiful part of the world to live in. So lucky. So, what's in my bag? Bunch of rope. So, before we start going into any kind of knots, I think it's worth just looking at some of the basic principles behind what goes into knot work. You've got a working end and you've got a bite, which is a loop in the rope. So the bite is a loop, and you would take, for a really simple knot like an overhand knot, you would take the working end and you would run it through the bite to create a knot. Okay, so that's some of the basic terminology. Then you've also got a whole host of differences between what is a knot, what is a bend, and what is a hitch. So a knot is anything that you can tie around the rope itself. So for instance, an overhand on the bite, you take a bite of rope, and same very simple overhand knot. So that's tying a knot on the bite. A hitch is something that has to be tied round something else. So the classic that everyone is used to is a clove hitch. So a clove hitch looks like this. Now, unless that's tied around something, that's just going to come apart. The same is true for an Italian hitch. Same thing, if nothing's in the middle, it falls apart. The same is true for any kind of hitch that you've got. It needs to be around an object. And then the last one is a bend. Now a bend ties two bits of rope together usually. So why am I blathering on about knots? Because in the work that we do in the outdoors, using rope and cord is a really fundamental part of the job. And there are three reasons to make sure that you actually know how to use the rope or the cord effectively. One is efficiency, the other is safety, and the third is about resource management. So if you're tying loads and loads of knots or wrapping rope round trees lots of times, you're obviously using a lot more of your resource than you need to. So knowing the proper knots will help you to use less resources. Efficiency is about making sure that the knot that you use is safe and effective for the purpose you're using it for. And the safety is about things like, let's say you're putting up a ridge line for a shelter. Obviously, if that is unsafe and the knot works loose, then potentially you've got a fire somewhere near the shelter or even under the shelter in some conditions, and that's literally potentially going to collapse the shelter onto the fire, which is potentially very hazardous. So all three of those are factors that we need to consider in what we're doing when we're tying knots. So let's take a good example for forest school and for the work that most of us are doing. Let's look at the knots that you would use potentially to tie the ridgeline for shelter. So what we're looking at there is you need one fixed anchor point at one end, and you need the ability to tension the line at the other end. And there are a number of different ways of doing that, but the fundamental principles are quite similar. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how to tie the knots at this point. There are plenty of really good apps on knot tying that will help. This is more about getting the principle of what you're doing right. So there you have an anchor point. So then the spare end of your rope can go round your tree, through your anchor point, and tension that off, and there you've got a loop that locks off. Then you can literally run that through there and just pull that tight around the tree, lock that off, and that's going to be a really solid anchor point at one end of the tree. At the other end, we need to be able to tension the rope because obviously just stringing a rope from point A to point B, if you can't tension it, there's a lot of slack there that you can't take up in the ropes. So how does that all actually come together? How simple is it to put up and how simple is it to take down? I will demonstrate between these two benches and show you just how quickly you can put that whole system together, just how quickly you can take that whole system down again. So I'm going to use a figure of 8 on the bite at one end, and I'm going to use an alpine butterfly at the other end to create some tension, and I will just show you how that system works. It's literally 2 knots, and then you finish with the alpine butterfly. As you come back around the tree, you then finish off with 2 half hitches, and then I'll show you the half hitches and the other knots as well in close up, so that you've got an idea of just how easy that system is to put up and take down. So there you go, a whole system, really simple to set up, really simple to take down. There are of course thousands of ways of creating those anchor points, but the point I'm trying to make here is not to look at what particular knots or what particular hitches you need to use. I'm more looking at trying to understand the principles behind how the whole thing goes together, about creating a fixed anchor point, creating a way of tensioning the rope at the other end, and then locking that off with a decent amount of safety and the minimum amount of resources, so that the whole thing is super efficient and as quick and as easy as it can be, and ideally recoverable afterwards, so that you are leaving no trace in the woodlands and you're minimizing the wastage of any resources that you use. Just another really quick point, that whole system that I set up for the ridgeline, that exact same system, the principles apply to all of your guy lines as well, for any tarps that you're putting up. So wherever you're fixing it to the tarp, that should be your fixed anchor point. And then whenever you're fixing it to another tree or a peg in the ground or whatever it might be, that's where you need to create a system where you can tension and lock off that end of the rope. So exactly the same principles apply. You can just repeat that whole thing. So you can put an entire tarp up with one bit of rope, a few bits of paracord and 3 knots, just knowing 2 or 3 knots, really simple set of principles that mean that when the weather's bad or you're having a bad day, a learner's having a bad day, whatever it might be, you can simply put that up and you know it's going to stay where you put it, you know it's going to work, and you don't have to worry about it. And I think that having that kind of peace of mind is well worth the price of learning 3 knots and a few principles. So I hope you found this useful. Really looking forward to finding out how you guys do it too. Hope it was useful. Enjoy the sun. Have a lovely day.